think it's really important that this has been called for by the Home Secretary to do a review of the counter-extremism strategy, because I think in the time, in the space since the last review of the strategy, we've definitely seen that there has been an evolution of the way that extremism spreads, of the way that extremism is being mixed by different people. It's really important that the Home Secretary announced that extreme misogyny will be considered as part of this review of the strategy. I think it's come to the forefront of the conversation over the last few years that we really do need to consider the gender dynamics of extremism. And I think it's a key issue to consider it as a connection point between various expressions of extremism, even across ideological umbrellas. It is a point of connection between different forms of extremism, different ideological perspectives. It also can be viewed or reviewed as a sort of an element that is part of all the different ideologies. So we see that misogyny is a key part of white supremacy, for example, or ethno-nationalism, or xenophobia, or Islamist extremism. It is a part of all these different ideologies, as well as it itself being able to be a motivator to violence or an ideology of its own. So really considering the complexity of its influence in that way, I think will be key. I think one of the things that has become apparent from the research is that while the counterterrorism framework has perhaps been established in an ideologically blind way, it has in fact been applied in such a fashion for 2 decades and more to a very specific sense of what the primary threat was. Much of the understanding around the application of countering extremism efforts has been shaped towards the threat of Islamist extremism as it was seen as the primary threat in the UK. And now that we're really thinking about, okay, what do we need to do to consider a wider spectrum of potential threats, a wider spectrum of ideological threats, we have to start thinking about, is it fit for purpose? Sort of, are the efforts that have been designed as part of a countering extremism or a prevention approach, are they fit for purpose for these different ideological influences, and where people might be being exposed to these ideological influences, or what type of narratives are being used to draw them into these ideological influences. Another element to where we have done a lot of research is related to the issue specifically of misogyny, because it has been considered over the last several years as this sort of, do we need to think about it as an ideology itself, as a motivator to violence itself? And you can definitely see where, yes, it has been the primary motivator for cases of terrorism, cases of violence that have occurred. But we also have to think about the way that misogyny and other gender dynamics or gendered expectations of people play into all of the different ideologies on the spectrum, and to really consider how, because misogyny is part of all of these different ideologies, that it can form a connection point. So I think as we're thinking about working on improving threat assessment and working on improving sort of even, how we work with the communities, how we work with different groups of concern, that we really have to factor in and make sure that we're considering that through a gendered lens, so we can capture where misogyny might be a linking element between these, and have the countering extremism efforts addressing that element particularly.